I never believed the rumors when I first heard them. You hear a lot of strange things in wartime, whispered between tired soldiers over cigarettes, or muttered in broken English by frightened villagers. But what stuck with me, what I couldn't laugh off, were the stories about men never coming back from certain parts of the jungle. Not because of ambushes or mines, but because of something far older, something that didn't care which flag you fought under. It was 1944, and I was serving in the South Pacific. Our unit had been tasked with sweeping through an island that intelligence claimed was strategically uninhabited. No villages, no resistance, just dense rainforest and the suffocating heat. Yet even before we made landfall, the whispers spread among the Japanese prisoners we'd captured elsewhere. They said the island wasn't empty. They said it belonged to things that walk on two legs but aren't men. Some of them wouldn't even speak the name, as if the word itself would draw those creatures out of the shadows. When I pressed one prisoner through an interpreter, he only said 3 words before clamming up. His face drained of color, his eyes wet with terror. Man-eating demons. At first, my squad treated it like a joke. Daniels cracked wise that maybe we'd found King Kong's vacation home. Ruiz called it jungle fever, that the enemy was just trying to scare us into losing our nerve. But there was something about the way the older prisoners reacted that gnawed at me. These were men hardened by years of war, by hunger and shellfire, by the daily possibility of death. Yet the moment this subject came up, they turned pale like frightened children. The first sign something was wrong came on the second night ashore. We'd set up a rough perimeter in a clearing choked with vines. The heat was unbearable, mosquitoes thick enough to drink you dry, but at least we had a line of sight in the moonlight. That night, Jackson, the sergeant, my squad leader, told us to rotate watch in 2-man shifts. Around midnight, I woke to Torres shaking me, his voice low but urgent. "You hear that?" he whispered. At first, I thought it was the usual jungle racket. Tree frogs, birds, the hum of insects. But underneath it, I caught something else. A low growl. Not the kind you'd hear from a big cat or a wild dog, but deeper, slower, as if it carried intention. We trained our rifles on the tree line, the moon barely cutting through the canopy. Ruiz joined us, muttering that maybe it was just the wind in the branches. But I'd been in combat long enough to know the difference between imagination and a sound that sets every nerve in your body on edge. Then came the smell. It drifted in like a fog, sickly sweet, like rot mixed with copper. It coated the back of my throat, thick enough to make me gag. Daniels cursed under his breath, saying it smelled like a slaughterhouse. For nearly an hour, we heard it circling the perimeter. No movement we could see, just that heavy breathing and the occasional crack of a branch. When Jackson finally ordered us to hold fire, we sat in silence, rifles tight to our shoulders, waiting for something to break through the dark. Nothing did. By dawn, the jungle was still again, but the ground around the far side of the clearing was different. Prints, huge ones, barefoot, human-shaped, but longer, wider, and scattered among them were shreds of cloth. Japanese uniforms, faded and torn, ground into the mud. That morning, nobody laughed at the prisoners' words anymore. And that was only the beginning of what we found on that island. The jungle had secrets, and by the time we realized what we were facing, it was already too late to turn back. By the time the sun pushed its way over the treetops, the air was already heavy enough to feel like a wet blanket on your skin. Sweat dripped into my eyes as I crouched near those tracks, tracing the outline with my finger. They weren't like anything I'd ever seen. Too big to be human, too wide to belong to an ape. And the way the toes spread in the mud, it looked wrong, like something meant for gripping, not walking. Jackson called us together after breakfast, his voice sharp but steady. He didn't want the younger guys panicking, though I could see the unease in his eyes too. "We don't know what left those prints," he said. "Could be enemy tricks. Could be a jungle animal none of us are familiar with. Either way, we stay focused. Stick to the mission. We move east by mid-morning. No wandering, no stragglers." That was Jackson, hard as nails, never let fear show. But I'd been with him long enough to know when something rattled him. He kept checking those prints even after he dismissed us, his jaw set tight. The mission itself was supposed to be simple: reconnaissance. Our higher-ups wanted to map this island for future operations. Intel said the Japanese had used it as a supply route months earlier, but had since abandoned it. We were to confirm, mark any caches, then signal for extraction. 3 days, maybe 4, and we'd be off. But it didn't take long before the island began telling a different story. On our first push eastward, the jungle closed in like it didn't want us there. Every step was a fight through roots, vines, and thorns. The canopy above smothered most of the light, turning day into a kind of permanent twilight. Flies swarmed our helmets. Mosquitoes whined in our ears. The ground itself seemed alive. Ants, spiders, centipedes writhing underfoot. Torres muttered prayers in Spanish as we moved, crossing himself every time we passed something that looked like a shrine. And there were shrines, crudely built out of bones, vines, and old Japanese gear. Helmets split open, rifles rusting in the dirt, and small offerings left behind. Some were fresh, too fresh for a place that was supposed to be abandoned. "Looks like someone's been feeding the jungle gods," Ruiz joked, but his voice was strained, not mocking. We pressed on. Hours dragged by. The heat never broke. Every sound carried strange echoes. Once Daniels froze and swore he heard footsteps behind us, but when we turned, there was nothing. Just layers of trees and shadows stretching back to where we'd camped. By the second day, we found the first real sign we weren't alone. It was an encampment, or what was left of one. Japanese kit lay scattered around. Canteens, rotting boots, shredded tents, but no bodies, not even bones. Just drag marks in the dirt, as though something had pulled the men away. Jackson ordered us to fan out and search the area. I walked the perimeter, brushing aside thick ferns, when I found claw marks gouged deep into a tree trunk. They were higher than I could reach, even standing on my toes. Whatever had done it had size and strength. "Jesus Christ," Torres whispered when he saw. "What kind of animal can do that?" No one had an answer. That night we set up camp again, tighter this time. Claymores set, rifles loaded, men on high alert. Jackson didn't bother pretending anymore. He knew we were being watched. And sure enough, as soon as the sun dipped, the jungle came alive again. It wasn't just the growls this time. We heard movement, heavy, deliberate, circling us in the dark. Ruiz swore he saw something between the trees, something hunched and massive. But when we swept our flashlights across the canopy, it vanished. The smell returned too. That same foul mix of rot and metal. It clung to the air until I could taste it in my mouth. I remember staring at the tree line, every muscle locked, finger trembling on the trigger of my rifle. And in that silence, broken only by our shallow breaths, came a sound I'll never forget. A scream. Not human, not animal. Something caught in between, tearing through the night like it was inside my skull. It was long, guttural, rising higher until it split into two tones, as if more than one throat was shrieking at once. Every hair on my body stood on end. We held the line, waiting for it to rush us, but nothing came. Just silence again. Morning light felt like salvation, but the jungle gave us no rest. We found another set of prints in the mud, circling close, almost mocking us. And near the prints, half buried under leaves, we found something else. A torn Japanese flag, crusted dark with blood. I remember the look Jackson gave me then. No words, no orders, just that look. We both knew this wasn't an enemy we could outfight with bullets and bayonets. This was something else, something older. Still, the mission wasn't over. Orders were orders. We had to press deeper. And the deeper we went, the closer the jungle pulled us into its secret. That was the day I began to realize we weren't on reconnaissance at all. We were walking straight into a trap, one laid long before our boots ever touched this island. We pushed deeper into the island on the third day, but the jungle never gave way. No open ground, no high ridge to see where we were going. Just endless layers of green pressing in on every side. Every vine seemed to reach for us. Every shadow hung too long. The map was almost useless. Jackson marked our progress with a compass and grease pencil, but I swear we marched in circles more than once. By mid-morning, we stumbled onto something we hadn't expected at all. A clearing, not natural. Cleared by human hands, though no village stood there. Instead, the ground was littered with wreckage. Dozens of rusted helmets, shredded packs, rifles snapped clean in half. Japanese issue, all of it. Some of the gear was old, left to rot, but other pieces looked recent. Too recent. What froze me wasn't the gear itself. It was the absence of bodies. Again, not a single corpse, not even bones. Only the wreckage of men who'd been here. Torres crossed himself and muttered under his breath. Daniels knelt beside a broken rifle, turning it over in his hands. "How the hell does a weapon snap like this?" he asked. The barrel was twisted, warped as though wrenched by impossible strength. Jackson didn't answer. He just ordered us to move on. But the unease grew. That afternoon, we followed a stream east, hoping it would lead us toward the coast. The water should have been a relief, but none of us wanted to drink from it. The surface was slick with an oily film, and every so often we'd see flashes of something pale drifting under the surface. Maybe it was fish, maybe not. We didn't linger. As the sun dipped low, Ruiz, who was walking point, suddenly stopped cold. "Captain," he whispered, lifting his hand, "you're going to want to see this." Up ahead, sprawled across the stream, was the wreck of a Japanese radio set. Wires tangled with vines, the casing cracked, the whole unit half submerged in mud. Next to it lay a boot. Inside the boot, a foot. We all froze. The flesh was leathery, gray, stripped in places like something had gnawed it. The bones showed white at the ankle where the leg had been torn away. No body, just that foot, left behind like trash. Nobody cracked jokes this time. That night, the jungle closed in harder than before. We set camp near the stream, though none of us wanted to. The water gave us the creeps, but the terrain left us no choice. Jackson ordered us to build tighter defenses, tripwires with grenades, overlapping fields of fire, double shifts on watch. We worked in silence, every man glancing at the tree line as though expecting something to break through at any moment. When night fell, the noises started again. It began with footsteps, heavy ones, pacing just outside the circle of light from our fire. Then came the breathing, deep, ragged, so close I thought I felt it against the back of my neck. I gripped my rifle, finger ready, but Jackson hissed not to fire. "Wait," he said. "Wait until you see it." We waited. The minutes dragged on. My eyes strained into the dark, searching for movement, for anything. And then I saw it. A shape, hunched, massive, crouching low between the trees. The firelight caught its eyes first. 2 points of dull red, reflecting back at us like coals in the dark. Torres whispered, "Dios mío!" His voice cracked. The thing didn't rush us. It didn't retreat either. It just crouched there, watching, breathing. Then, as if mocking us, it stepped sideways into the firelight, just enough for us to see the outline of its face. It was wrong. The skull too long, the mouth too wide, filled with teeth that didn't belong in anything human. And its skin, patchy, scarred, stretched too thin over muscle that seemed to twitch on its own. Before we could react, it melted back into the dark, gone like smoke. That was worse than if it had attacked. At least then we could have fired, done something. Instead, it left us sitting there with our rifles shaking, listening as its footsteps circled the camp for hours. None of us slept. By dawn, Daniels broke. He packed his gear in silence and started walking west, muttering that he wasn't going to die out here. Jackson grabbed him, shoved him back down, barked in his face, "You leave this squad, you're already dead. You understand me?" But Daniels wouldn't stop trembling. His hands shook so hard he could barely hold his weapon. I'd seen fear before, in firefights, in foxholes. But this was different. He wasn't afraid of dying. He was afraid of being taken. We pushed east again, though none of us had much fight left in us. Every mile, the jungle seemed to tighten its grip. Branches hung lower, vines thicker, the air heavier, and then came the smell again. We all froze as it rolled over us, thick, cloying, metallic. Ahead, the jungle opened into another clearing, smaller this time, and in the center of it, we found them. Bodies, dozens, Japanese uniforms torn to rags, helmets split open, bones gnawed clean. Some were only half consumed, flesh still hanging in strips from rib cages. Flies swarmed so thick the air buzzed. I turned and vomited into the dirt. Ruiz covered his mouth, whispering, "They weren't lying." My God, they weren't lying. Torres bent to cross himself again, but Jackson snapped, "Don't look! Keep moving, eyes up." His voice cracked on the last word. But there was no moving past it. Not really. The image stayed with me. The bones scattered like kindling. The skulls split as if cracked open for marrow. That night, nobody dared light a fire. We sat in darkness, rifles ready, waiting. And the jungle didn't disappoint. It started with the scream again, echoing through the trees, rattling the very air. Then came the footsteps, dozens of them this time. Not one creature. Many. Shapes moved in the shadows around us. We caught glimpses. Limbs too long, jaws too wide, bodies hunched but fast. Their eyes glowed faint in the moonlight as they circled. Daniels lost it. He opened fire, spraying into the trees. The gunfire tore through the night, muzzle flashes lighting glimpses of things moving, darting between the trees, too fast to track. "Cease fire!" Jackson roared, grabbing Daniels by the collar. "You're giving us away!" But it was too late. The jungle erupted. Branches snapped, growls rolled through the dark, and then something lunged into the clearing. I only saw it for a moment in the muzzle flash, but that was enough. Its chest was broad as a man's, but its arms dragged nearly to the ground. Its mouth unhinged wide enough to bite through a man's head, teeth jagged like shards of bone. Torres screamed and fired point blank. The creature howled, staggered back, but didn't fall. The sound it made wasn't pain, it was rage. Then the others joined in. Dozens of shapes surged at the edge of the tree line, their red eyes blinking in and out. The jungle thundered with their growls. We opened fire, every rifle blazing, grenades hurling arcs into the dark. Explosions lit the clearing, tearing trees apart. But for every shadow that fell, two more appeared. We fought until our barrels burned, until the night itself seemed to close over us. And in that chaos, I realized something that froze me more than the creatures themselves. They weren't attacking to kill us. Not yet. They were hurting us, driving us deeper into the island. That was the night we understood the truth. We weren't hunters on reconnaissance. We weren't even soldiers anymore. We were prey, and the jungle wasn't going to let us leave alive. We tried to backtrack at first. After that night of being pushed like cattle, Jackson wanted distance from whatever was circling us, so we pivoted west to retrace our steps. It should have worked. The compass held steady, the landmarks were familiar, yet the jungle didn't line up anymore. Trails we'd cut were gone, vines regrown, branches hanging lower than before. Even the stream sounded different, like it had shifted its bed in the dark. By mid-morning, we found our old camp, or what was left of it. The tripwires were torn down, the stakes were gone. In the center of the clearing, someone had piled our firewood into a little pyramid and stuck a single object on top. Daniel's canteen cup. Inside it sat a chunk of meat, gray at the edges, already slick with flies. Daniel stared at it, jaw working. "That ain't mine," he whispered, even though we all knew it was. Jackson swept the perimeter. "They're telling us they can walk in and do what they want," he said. "Message received. We move." We pushed east again, not because it felt safer, but because every path behind us felt blocked. The jungle sounded wrong. Bird calls cut off mid-note. The steady insect drone rose and fell like someone was turning a dial. And sometimes over the thrum, we heard a voice. At first it was distant Japanese. A man speaking quick, clipped phrases we couldn't make out. Then English. "Help," it said. A man's voice, American. Close. We froze and fanned, rifles up. "Where are you?" I shouted. "Here," it answered. Same voice, same word, as if it had only learned the one. "Here!" Torres pointed upward. The sound wasn't coming from the ground. It hung in the canopy, caught in the leaves. We stood there with our heads tilted back, searching branches that shifted in the humid wind. "Don't move," Jackson said, voice low. "That's a lure." Ruiz swallowed. "A what?" "A trap, kid." The jungle went quiet again, quick as a snapped finger. We found the bell an hour later. It hung between two trees that had grown into each other, trunk wrapped around trunk like a braid. The bell itself was old bronze, green with age. The rim dented, the clapper replaced by a shard of bone tied off with twine. Beneath it lay a ring of posts hammered into the dirt. On each post, a helmet, some Japanese, some American. One looked British, the old shallow kind I'd only seen in pictures. Wind threaded through bamboo reeds strung from branch to branch, and whenever a gust made them sing, the bell answered with a dull, throaty note that carried into the trees. There were carvings on the posts, crude cuts of figures with their mouths open too wide. On the ground inside the circle, someone had etched a map in charcoal. Not of the island's coastline, but of tunnels. A whole web of them, drawn like a spider's nest, with little marks that looked like teeth along the lines. Ruiz knelt beside the map and touched a symbol over and over. "See that?" he said, tapping a small square with a star over it. "That's an ammo cache symbol. My uncle taught me that. Hunters use it to mark dried meat racks too." He went quiet. "Bait." Jackson picked up a weathered field notebook from the base of one post. The paper was soft with damp. The handwriting inside was Japanese, tight and disciplined. He handed it to me. I flipped through page after page of the same signs repeated in different hands, as if many men had written the same warning. I didn't read Japanese, but one sketch didn't need translating. It was a rough line drawing of a figure with a man's body and a head that stretched long like a horse's skull. Rows of teeth like broken shells. Beneath it, someone had written the same word again and again. The characters grew sloppier, the lines darker, as if the hand had been shaking. Jackson tapped it with a finger. "What's that say?" Our interpreter had been attached to another platoon. All we had was a memory of a prisoner's whisper. I said the only thing that fit. "Man-eating demons." Torres backed from the ring, making the sign of the cross without looking like he meant to. "People built this," he said. "People lived with it, fed it." Daniels pointed at the helmets. "From when? How long?" "Long enough," I said, and wished I hadn't. We followed the charcoal map because there was nothing else to follow. It led us through a gash in the earth hidden by ferns and fallen fronds. The opening was narrow, a man-wide crack in damp rock, and the air that breathed out of it was cold. Not cool, cold, like a cellar under winter ground. "Lights," Jackson said. "No firing unless you have to. If one shot goes off in there, we all go deaf." We clicked on our flashlights. The beams cut thin lanes through powdery air. White moths knocked themselves senseless against the glass. The rock walls were slick and banded with something that looked like salt, though when I touched it, the grains stuck like ash. The tunnel dropped fast, forcing us to crab walk. Our boots crunched on things I didn't want to look at. Shells, teeth, knuckles the size of berries. The voice came again as we descended. "Here," it said, almost cheerful now. "Help!" Jackson killed his light. We all did. The dark had weight. We stood in it and listened. From deeper in the tunnels, something answered the bell, not with a strike, but with a breath. A long, low exhale that seemed to move the air around us. When it ended, another exhale came from the opposite side, then another from behind, a triangle around us. "They're not just hunting," I said, feeling the words more than hearing them. "They're calling." "Calling who?" Ruiz asked. "Each other," Jackson said, "or something bigger." We switched the lights back on as one, and that was when we saw the wall markings. Not carvings this time. Paint, thick, dark, smeared by hands. The strokes formed spirals with teeth painted along the edges. The same symbol from the map, except now the spirals were layered on top of each other. A nest inside a nest. Torres's beam stopped on a hunk of metal driven into the stone. It was the top half of a radio set, old and torn apart. But the speaker grill had been left intact and wired to a coil. He tilted his head. "Why wire up a radio if you don't have power?" As if to answer, a faint crackle came through the grill, followed by a burst of static that made us flinch. Then a man's voice, this time in careful Japanese, clipped and clear, as if speaking from the far end of a long metal tube. Ruiz leaned in. "What's it saying?" Jackson's face tightened. "It's counting." The voice repeated a sequence, 4 numbers, then a pause. 4 numbers again. The hair crawled on my arms. Numbers are order. Numbers are control. Natural things don't count in the dark. The counting stopped. The same voice switched tongues in a way that wasn't human at all. Here, it said, in perfect imitation of the American voice, and then again in Spanish, then in a thin child's whisper, like a choir teasing from the stone. Daniels took a step back. His heel slipped on a wet rib and he jolted forward, cursing. "I'm not going in there," he said. "I don't care what's down there. I'm not." "We finish this," Jackson said. "We find the center, we mark it, and we get out." "The center of what?" Ruiz asked. "The nest," Jackson said. The tunnel bent left and the air pulled tighter, as if the island itself were taking a breath in. My beam found a scrap of cloth on the wall, pinned under a stone shard. It was a piece of a sleeve, olive green like ours, with a name tape inked by hand in sweat-dark letters. I recognized the name. Not a man from our squad, from our division, a runner who'd gone missing in a storm 2 months back, written off as drowned. We looked at one another in the cold light, each of us doing the same math in our heads. This wasn't a new horror, it was an old one. We hadn't been the first to feed it. The counting started again in the radio grill, slow and patient, like it knew we were listening. We moved forward. Down there, the ground widened and the ceiling dropped low, and what we found next made man-eating demons sound kinder than the truth. The tunnel widened until it opened into a chamber so large our flashlights barely touched the far walls. The air was colder than outside, and it carried a smell thicker than rot, like blood soaked into stone, clinging there for years. Our boots scraped over a floor that wasn't rock at all, but layered bones crushed flat by weight and time. No one spoke at first. The silence itself felt alive, broken only by the faint crackle of that wired radio behind us, still counting, still repeating its strange litany. Torres's beam caught on something hanging from the ceiling, a shape swinging gently, almost too high to reach with the light. It was a rib cage, human, split open and tied with strips of sinew to the rock above, like a lantern. Ruiz gagged and turned away, muttering, "Madre de Dios!" But the worst was still waiting deeper in the chamber. Against the far wall lay an altar, not stone, metal, the twisted frame of an old Japanese field gun, stripped and bent until it stood upright like a crucifix. Around it were stacked helmets, bones, scraps of fabric, offerings. A dozen skulls balanced along its barrel, each split open down the crown. And below it, in a circle darkened with dried stains, sat carvings. Not carved with tools, but gouged by claws or teeth. Spirals again, hundreds of them, burned into the rock like someone had tried to scrape their way out of the world. "Jesus," Daniels whispered. "What is this place?" Jackson didn't answer. He didn't have to. We all knew. This was where the creatures fed, where they were worshipped, or where they worshipped something else. Then we heard it. Not the growl, not the breath. A voice. At first it sounded like static again, seeping from the rock itself. Then it shaped words. Slow, careful, too deliberate to be human. "Hungry," it said, in English. The sound rolled through the chamber like it came from everywhere at once. We spun, flashlights jerking from wall to wall. Red eyes flickered at the edges of the beam. One pair, then three, then dozens. "They're here," Torres hissed. Figures began to step forward, crawling down the walls, rising from the bone floor, as if they'd been lying in wait. Massive shoulders hunched under the low ceiling, mouths too wide, teeth glinting wet. They moved on 2 legs, but loped forward with an animal's rhythm. We opened fire. The chamber exploded with sound. Rifle bursts, shouts, the thunder of grenades thrown into the spirals. Dust and bone fragments filled the air. The creature shrieked, a high-pitched tearing sound that stabbed into the skull. One staggered into the open, chest riddled with rounds, but it didn't fall. It threw itself forward with impossible speed, striking Daniels full in the side. The impact snapped his arm and sent him sprawling into the bone pile. "Daniel!" Ruiz screamed, firing point blank into the thing's side. The rounds punched through, black ichor spraying, but it only reared up and howled, knocking Ruiz off his feet with a swipe of its arm. Torres lobbed a grenade toward the altar. The explosion ripped through the chamber, sending helmets and skulls flying. For a moment, the creatures pulled back, their shrieks rising in unison like a single voice of rage. "Move!" Jackson barked. "Back to the tunnel!" We hauled Daniels to his feet, half dragging him, as more shadows poured from cracks in the chamber walls. They weren't just circling us, they were funneling us deeper, the same way they had in the jungle. The radio grill's voice followed us, no longer counting. Now it laughed, not a human laugh, but a jagged, broken mimicry that bounced off the walls like nails on glass. We ran. The tunnel twisted, forcing us lower, deeper. Our beams bounced wildly off wet stone, shadows bending in impossible angles. Behind us, the shrieks drew closer, claws scraping the walls like knives. Daniel stumbled, his broken arm flopping uselessly, and we pulled him along. "Leave me," he croaked, face pale. "Just leave me." "No one gets left," Jackson snapped, dragging him harder. His voice was steel, but his eyes told the truth. He knew we weren't all getting out. The tunnel ended in another chamber, smaller but no safer. Here the walls were covered not in spirals but in paintings. Dozens of figures drawn in black and red, all of them kneeling before a shape towering above them. The shape's body was human, but its head stretched long, its jaws opening into a ring of teeth. And around it were marks, tallies scratched into the wall, thousands of them, layered over each other until the stone itself seemed to bleed. "Body count," I said before I realized I'd spoken. Torres turned on me. "You think this is war? This is feeding, generations of it." Before I could answer, the ground shook. Not from our grenades, from below. Something massive shifted beneath the chamber, dust raining from the ceiling. The creatures outside the tunnel shrieked louder, as if calling to it. And that was when I understood. The ones we'd seen weren't the demons. They were just the hunters. The real thing, the thing they served, was still coming. The floor split in places, thin cracks spidering out. A low rumble rolled through the chamber, like the island itself was growling. Jackson's jaw tightened. "We find another way out," he said. "Now!" But even as he said it, I could hear movement in every direction. The tunnels weren't exits. They were veins. And we had walked straight into the heart. That was the moment I realized our mission was over. Survival wasn't about reaching the coast anymore. It was about making it through the next hour. The cracks in the chamber floor widened until they yawned like mouths, exhaling a wind that reeked of iron and decay. The bones beneath our boots rattled as though alive. My light shook across the jagged lines and caught a glint. Teeth. Not scattered teeth from the dead, but a circle of them embedded in the stone itself, as if the earth had grown a jaw. The shrieks outside rose to a fever pitch. Dozens of red eyes burned in the tunnels, closing in. Their shadows stretched along the walls, too long, bending like broken limbs. And then they surged. The first creature barreled through the tunnel mouth, its massive shoulders scraping stone, mouth yawning wide. Jackson dropped it with 3 bursts to the chest, but it kept crawling forward, claws raking the ground. Torres stepped up and jammed the barrel of his rifle into its eye socket before pulling the trigger. The thing spasmed and collapsed, but 2 more lunged over it. We fired until the chamber filled with smoke, muzzle flashes strobing against the painted walls. Shadows leapt with every blast. The creatures didn't retreat. They swarmed, their bodies piling through the cracks like water bursting a dam. "Grenade!" Ruiz shouted, hurling one into the mouth of the tunnel. The blast blew rock and flesh apart, showering the chamber with shards. For a heartbeat, the passage was choked with rubble. Daniels was on his knees, cradling his broken arm, whispering to himself. I hauled him up by his webbing. "Stay on your feet, damn it!" The floor groaned again, splitting wider. This time something moved beneath it. Not claws, not footsteps, something deeper. A weight dragging itself slowly upward, shaking dust from the ceiling. When it broke the surface, it didn't come fast. It rose slowly, like it had all the time in the world. First came the smell, so thick and sour it choked the breath from our lungs. Then a shape, tall enough to stoop even in the high chamber. It was man-shaped, but wrong in every proportion. Arms too long, legs bent backward at the knee. Its skin stretched pale and thin, veins pulsing dark beneath the surface. The head tilted as it rose, neck cracking. And the mouth. God help me, the mouth wasn't just wide. It split around the skull in a ring of teeth, opening like a lamprey. Inside was only blackness, deeper than the tunnels, deeper than the earth. Torres fired first, panic in his eyes. The rounds tore through the thing's torso, but it didn't even flinch. It stepped forward, and with one sweep of its arm, it knocked Torres off his feet, his body slamming into the wall with a sickening crack. He didn't get back up. "Fall back," Jackson roared. "Other side, now!" We scrambled toward the opposite tunnel, dragging Daniels. Ruiz laid down fire, bullets sparking off rock and flesh alike. One of the hunters leapt at him from the side, jaws snapping. Ruiz jammed his bayonet up under its chin, the steel punching through the roof of its mouth. The creature spasmed, shrieked, and collapsed, pinning him to the floor. "Go!" he screamed, voice ragged. "I'll hold!" The larger thing moved before he could finish. It stooped low, that ring of teeth yawning wide, and swallowed Ruiz from the shoulders up. His scream cut short, muffled inside the blackness. When the thing stood again, half his body dangled limp from its jaws, then slid down into its throat. I'll never forget the sound. Wet. Final. Daniels nearly collapsed, screaming Ruiz's name, but Jackson dragged him forward. "Move, damn you! Move!" We sprinted into the tunnel, flashlights bouncing, the shrieks of the hunters behind us. The air was alive with echoes. The thing's ragged breath, the pounding of claws on stone, the thud of something enormous dragging itself after us. The tunnel bent upward, narrow, forcing us to crawl on hands and knees. Behind us, claws scraped rock, closer and closer. Daniels sobbed, one arm dangling useless. Jackson shoved him forward, whispering, "Keep going. Just keep going." We burst into another chamber, smaller, low ceiling, air sharp with mold. The walls here were carved differently, not spirals but tallies, hundreds, thousands, cut deep as if with fingernails. Some were still wet, glistening. The hunters poured in behind us. Jackson threw the last of our grenades, the blast tearing stone from the ceiling. Rock collapsed, sealing half the tunnel. The chamber shook, dust raining down. For a moment, silence, then a hand, massive, pale, punched through the rubble. Claws scrabbled, stone cracking. The larger thing was still coming. Jackson turned to me. His face was pale but steady. "You get Daniels out." I shook my head. "We all go." "There's no all," he said flatly. He shoved me toward a narrow crawl space in the wall I hadn't noticed, half hidden under a slab of rock. "That's your way. Take him." "What about you?" He gave a tight smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I'll buy you time." The rubble split wider, stone collapsing. The ring of teeth emerged, opening wider than before. The hunters shrieked in triumph, crowding behind it. Jackson squared himself, rifle raised. "Go!" I dragged Daniels into the crawl space. The last thing I saw before the dark swallowed us was Jackson firing point blank into that impossible mouth, the muzzle flashes lighting his face. Then the thing surged forward and he was gone. The crawl space twisted forever. My elbows scraped stone. My lungs screamed for air. Daniels whimpered behind me, delirious from pain. The sound of pursuit faded, replaced by the drip of water and the beating of my own heart. Finally, light. I dragged us out onto a slope of mud and stone, collapsing in the humid air of the jungle. The canopy above looked almost merciful, the sky a pale strip beyond it. I gulped it like a drowning man. Daniels lay beside me, pale, shaking. "Where's Jackson?" I didn't answer. We staggered down the slope, half carrying each other, until we reached the stream again. By some cruel miracle, we had circled back to where we'd found the foot in the boot. The jungle was silent. Too silent. Daniels whispered, "We're not out. Not yet." He was right. The air was still heavy with that smell, the copper-sweet rot that never left. The hunters were out there, maybe even the larger thing, watching, waiting. And for the first time, I wondered if anyone had ever left this island alive at all. We weren't out yet, and what waited in the shadows wasn't finished with us. The jungle swallowed us again, but it didn't feel like the same place anymore. Every tree looked familiar, yet twisted. Every sound felt staged, like the whole island was breathing with us, waiting for us to stumble. Daniels leaned heavy against me, his face pale, lips cracked. His broken arm hung useless, the bones swelling beneath the sleeve. We moved slow, careful, every step pulling us deeper into exhaustion. My canteen was nearly dry, and Daniels could barely lift his boots clear of the roots. But stopping wasn't an option. Every time we paused, I swore I heard them. Branches shifting, that wet, ragged breath just beyond sight. By afternoon, the sky grew heavy with rain. Sheets of water poured through the canopy, drenching us in minutes. It should have been relief, but all it did was drown out sound. I hated it, hated not hearing what might be creeping closer. We followed the stream south, hoping it might lead to the coast. Daniel stumbled more often, his muttering slipping into nonsense. "They're still here," he whispered, even in the rain, watching, waiting for night. I didn't answer. I couldn't tell him he was right. By dusk, we reached the coast. At least I think it was. The trees thinned, and we stumbled onto a stretch of black sand, littered with driftwood and jagged coral. The ocean stretched endless, gray under the storm clouds. For a moment, I felt a flicker of hope. If we could get a signal fire going, maybe someone might see it. But the moment I thought it, I noticed the sand. It wasn't clean. Scattered across it were bones, half buried, washed smooth by waves. Human, dozens of them, some still wrapped in rotting scraps of uniforms. Daniels fell to his knees. "Oh God! Oh God, they all made it this far too." I pulled him up. "Don't look, keep moving." But it was impossible not to look. Impossible not to see the jagged piles of skulls stacked against the tree line, as though the jungle had spit them back onto the shore. We built the fire anyway. Driftwood, dry brush, anything we could gather. My hands shook so badly I nearly dropped the matches. By nightfall, the flames licked high, sparks vanishing into the storm. For a while, we sat close, shivering, staring at the fire as if it could keep the darkness at bay. Daniels leaned against me, murmuring about home, about his mother's cooking, about anything but this place. I let him talk. It was all that kept him breathing. The first scream came past midnight. It carried across the beach high and broken, the same way it had in the jungle. My blood froze. Daniels jolted awake, eyes wide. "They're here!" Shapes moved at the edge of the firelight, hunched, waiting. The flames flickered in the wind, shadows bending. Red eyes blinked from the tree line. I raised my rifle, but deep down I knew it wouldn't matter. Then out of the storm, a new sound. Engines. Distant, faint, but real. I looked up to see a pair of faint lights moving low across the horizon. Patrol boats. American. I screamed, waved my rifle. Fired bursts into the sky. "Here! Here!" The lights didn't change course, didn't slow. Maybe they saw. Maybe they didn't. But the noise drew the hunters back. The red eyes blinked out, swallowed by the dark. Even predators knew better than to challenge steel and guns they couldn't reach. When the lights faded into the storm, the beach went silent again. Daniel slumped beside me, weeping. "They didn't see. We're still here." I didn't answer. My throat was too tight. By dawn, the fire had burned to embers. Daniels was gone, his body still there, but his eyes glassy, his chest still, his injuries, the exhaustion, the fear. It all finally broke him. I sat alone staring at the surf. The jungle behind me was quiet, too quiet, like it was waiting. When extraction finally came, days later I think, I don't remember how, a patrol found me half dead on the sand, babbling about red eyes in the dark. They hauled me aboard, shoved water into me, wrapped me in a blanket. No one believed what I told them. They chalked it up to fever, to trauma, to another soldier cracked under the weight of war. The island wasn't marked on any maps, they said. No record of a mission there. No bodies recovered, no Daniels, no Jackson, nothing. But I know what I saw. I know what's still out there. Because some nights, even now, decades later, I hear it again. That scream tearing through the dark, carried on the wind like it's searching for me. And I wonder how many more patrols, how many more men have fed the island since. The war ended, the records closed, but the jungle doesn't forget, and the things that walked in its shadows are still hungry. I've spent a lifetime trying to put the war behind me, The medals, the photographs, the official histories, they tell one story. But what we lived on that island, that never made it into the reports, it never will. Sometimes I wonder if that was the point, to bury it, to pretend the jungle didn't swallow whole squads of men from both sides. Easier to say they went missing or drowned, or were cut down in firefights that no one survived to confirm. Easier than admitting there are things out there we can't fight, things older than any war we've ever waged. I don't know if those creatures were born from the jungle, or if the jungle was born from them. I don't know if they were worshipped as gods, or if men simply learned to fear them enough to feed them. All I know is that they were real, and they are still there. You can laugh at that if you want. Call it the rambling of an old soldier with too many scars and too many ghosts. But I've seen men torn apart in gunfire. I've seen what artillery can do to a body, and I've seen what starvation does to the strongest of us. Nothing compares to what walked on that island. Sometimes I wake in the night, heart hammering, convinced I hear claws scraping along the floorboards, or that sickly sweet rot drifting through the window. Sometimes I swear I hear voices from the trees outside, calling the same word over and over, here, here. And I wonder if what happened there ever really ended. Because if those things can live hidden on one island, feeding for generations without ever being wiped out, who's to say they're not elsewhere? Other jungles, other forgotten corners of the world where wars have raged and bodies have disappeared without explanation. Maybe that's the part that chills me most. Not that I survived when the others didn't. Not even the memory of the teeth or the red eyes watching us in the dark. It's knowing that somewhere, right now, another squad might be stepping onto a patch of ground that isn't marked on any map. Hearing the same screams. Smelling the same rot. Believing they're on a mission of war, when in truth they've already been chosen as prey. And when they don't come back, the world will just shrug and say, that's war. You're still watching without subscribing? Fix it now. Subscribe, the next story's coming. And in the comments, share your country and the time you're watching this.